Hello, everyone. It's currently 4 a.m. as I'm recording this, and nothing about the situation I'm in has changed for the better. There have been no new updates from local authorities, and I'm starting to doubt if this whole ordeal will end any time soon. I suppose that I'll make this quick before something happens to me, for the better or worse. For some context, I live in a town situated in a sparsely populated area of Washington state. It's not a very big town, but it isn't a small one either. The whole thing began about 6 hours ago, while I was hanging out with some friends at my friend Caesar's house. We were in the middle of a very dramatic game of Uno, when all of a sudden, this message flashed on the television screen, accompanied by the familiar sound of the EAS alarm. Emergency alert system. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense. A civil emergency warning is issued for the following counties. All residents living in the aforementioned counties are advised to stay indoors due to an unprecedented threat. Lock all entrances into your home. Turn off all lights, and do not let anybody into your home under any circumstances. Emergency services will not be available until the 8th of November 2024, 8 a.m. Effective until all clear is given. We were all too stunned to speak. A ton of questions raced through my mind, but I couldn't come up with any feasible explanation. And from the expressions on their faces, neither could my friends. For a few moments, nobody said a word, until my friend Michaela broke the silence by saying, "Well, that's certainly something." "Well, guess you guys are stuck here with me now," said Caesar, as he opened a can of Coca-Cola that he had just got from the fridge. "Fuck, man. I ain't staying here with you guys," groaned Adrian as he slumped back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the cards in his hands. "Too bad." Michaela chuckled. "You're gonna have to stay here with us." "Whatever," Adrian replied. He placed down a yellow card, adding to the steadily growing pile of cards in the center of the dining table. At that moment, the droning sound of a low-flying helicopter grabbed our attention. We sprang from our chairs and headed to the living room window, where we watched as the silhouette of the helicopter passed overhead. It was hard to tell, especially at night, but we could see the number 58 painted on the side of the helicopter, indicating to us that it was most likely a military aircraft. A beam of light emanating from the copter's underside briefly illuminated the near-empty street and the surrounding houses, before the aircraft flew off and disappeared into the night sky. But what really caught our attention were the military vehicles that came by just as the helicopter flew overhead. Humvees, APCs, and military trucks drove past the houses, some of which were briefly illuminated as they passed underneath the copter's powerful searchlight. Strangely, though, they were all painted white instead of the typical green or light brown that is usually seen on military vehicles. Other than that, none of them bore any insignia or indication as to where they were from. Most strange of all, however, were the black SUVs that followed just behind them. I counted maybe 5 or 6 of them, but it was hard to tell, especially given how fast they were driving. They didn't seem to be undercover cops, but I had seen enough movies and television shows to safely assume that these were probably the FBI or some other government agency. The vehicles sped off into the distance, going in the direction of the nearby fire station. Dang, that must have been the National Guard, Michaela said, in awe of what she had just witnessed. They seem to be looking for something, Monica noted. Or someone, I added. An escaped fugitive, perhaps? But that's the whole fucking military, Caesar objected. Unless it's like a terrorist or something. At that moment, 3 more vehicles drove past, and I was able to take a quick glance at them. 2 of them were once again black SUVs, but the third seemed to be some sort of van. I couldn't take a good look at them, however, before they once again sped off down the road. Beats me, Kate replied. So, you guys want to keep playing Uno? Nah, I think I'm good, said Monica. Though the atmosphere amongst us was still somewhat jovial, there was a hint of worry and nervousness. Maybe we should, do what the alert told us to do? Isabel finally spoke up. We all agreed with her. After all, if there was an armed suspect or something else that was on the loose, then it would probably be a good idea to do what the authorities advised us to do. So, Caesar and I locked all the doors and windows and turned off all the lights, except for the one in the basement, which is where we decided to stay for the meantime. We continued our game of Uno, but by that point, the shock and worry that we received from the alert had soiled much of the thrill and excitement that was present before. Eventually, we grew bored and decided that we should probably hit the sack now, since we didn't really have a choice. Caesar got out some spare mattresses and pillows and handed them to each of us. I went upstairs to sleep in one of the bedrooms along with Caesar and Monica, while the rest stayed in the basement. I laid down on the mattress and began scrolling through YouTube and Reddit on my phone, until I inevitably grew tired and fell asleep. Some time later, I awoke to the sound of creaking and footsteps coming from the backyard, right outside the room I was sleeping in. I initially assumed the noises were a raccoon or something else that was scurrying across the yard. But as I listened carefully, I realized that the footsteps sounded more human, and they almost sounded like someone was limping or stumbling around. Getting up, I crept towards the partially open window and slowly opened the blinds. Squinting to see in the dark, I surveyed the area through the open blinds. The backyard was bathed in a faint moonlight. To the right was a small shed, but other than that, it was mostly empty. I sighed in relief, thinking that it indeed had been some sort of wild animal, and was about to close the blinds and go right back to sleep. Which is why I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw her. I somehow hadn't noticed before, but beside the shed, there appeared to be the silhouette of a young girl. She seemed to have long hair, and was in a crouched position, but those were the only details I could ascertain. I had to do a double take to make sure I was seeing things correctly. But indeed, there was a fucking girl in the backyard. Dude, I thought you were asleep. A tired voice spoke from behind me. Jesus Christ. Caesar, don't scare me like that, I replied. I wasn't trying to, Caesar said as he rubbed his eyes. What are you doing? Caesar, Did you lock the backyard gate earlier? I inquired. Ah, fuck. I forgot. What about it? Just come over here, I told him, my gaze still transfixed on the young girl. She still hadn't moved from her original spot. Caesar came to the window, and I pointed to where the young girl was. As expected, he was startled to see her there. What the fuck, dude? He mumbled. How'd she get there? Beats me, I responded. Through the gate, probably. As we both stood there looking through the window, the sound of a vehicle pulling up out front caught our attention. Carefully, we made our way to the living room window and peeked through the blinds. Outside, a black SUV similar to the ones we saw before was parked in front of the house, its powerful headlights illuminating the front yard. The window blinds only permitted thin shafts of light to stream into the living room. Then, 4 people got out of the car. 3 men and a woman. They all seemed to be wearing military-style gear and were carrying assault rifles. But one of the men, a tall and bulky Hispanic-looking dude, was carrying some sort of device that we couldn't see very clearly. We could also see small patches on their shoulders that read SIRS, or something like that. Careful not to alert them to our presence, Caesar and I listened on their conversation. She should be around here somewhere, the Hispanic dude said. You sure, Garcia? One of the men asked. This one was slightly shorter and of average build. I don't fucking trust this one a bit. Come on, Connor, replied the other man, who was slimmer but roughly the same height. We've dealt with her before. What's gonna make this any different? I don't fucking know, retorted Connor. Probably because she killed like 20 of our guys back in Almoda. More than that, actually, the woman added. She was blonde and had a ponytail, and was slightly shorter than the others. Are they looking for the girl? Caesar nudged me. Probably. Fuck, man. She's literally in the backyard. And by the sounds of it, things aren't gonna be pretty, added Caesar. We both shuddered at the thought of what could possibly happen once they find her. We watched as the 4 split into 2 groups. Garcia and Connor headed down the footpath along the side of the house, while the other 2 headed in the opposite direction and rounded the other side. Me and Caesar quickly headed back to our room, by which point Monica and Isabel had been aroused from their slumber. The fuck were you guys doing? A half-asleep Monica asked. Dude, there's people outside our fucking house, Caesar replied in a hushed tone. They've got guns. They're going round to the back. What? Isabel looked at us inquisitively after she let out a yawn. Suddenly, we heard something being knocked over outside, followed by rapid footsteps. The 4 of us were drawn to the window, through which we watched as Garcia and Connor walked through the open fence gate and into the backyard, guns raised and ready. As Garcia swept his rifle across the yard, the flashlight on the end of the barrel briefly illuminated the shed, and for a moment, we were able to see the young girl in full. She appeared no older than 13 or 14, and was wearing a dark green dress of some sorts. There was a 3-digit number tattooed on the side of her neck, though I could only make out the first 2 digits as 00, while the third digit was either a 5 or a 6. As the light was trained on her, she could be seen covering her face with her arms.
"She's right there. She's right there,"
Garcia yelled, having evidently spotted her.
"Scorpion to HQ. We've sighted the target."
To the girl, he shouted,
"Don't you fucking—"
All of a sudden, we heard a loud pop, prompting us to duck for cover. However, I was the only person who remained standing long enough to see Garcia falling to the ground. His head was gone, and what remained of his neck was now a gaping hole. Chunks of flesh were strewn across the yard, and dark red blood spattered everywhere. The girl was still crouched, but she was no longer covering her face. In fact, it looked as if she was grinning, almost ear to ear. She made a sweeping motion with her left arm, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn her hand glowed blue or purple. What followed was a deafening cacophony of automatic gunfire that shattered the quiet yet tense atmosphere of the neighborhood. I dropped onto my stomach below the windowsill and covered my ears. Isabel hastily crawled underneath her mattress, while Caesar and Monica were huddled together on the floor as the sound of gunshots continued. Though I was covering my ears, I could faintly hear Connor yelling something to the effect of, "Subject is engaging us. Request for backup," before he suddenly let out a terrifying scream that seemed to literally go over the whole house. His screams were quickly silenced, and a few moments later, we could hear what sounded like heavy objects falling onto the roof. The gunfire briefly ceased. We all rose from cover, shaken to the core by what had just happened. I tried to peek through the window to see what was happening, but at that point, Adrian burst into the room yelling,
"What the fuck is going on?"
At that moment, more gunshots rang through the air. We sprinted from our room as a bullet passed through the window, but as we did, we heard what sounded like the woman yell something before a loud crash rocked the house. Caesar went into the kitchen to investigate, while the rest of us sprinted into the basement, where Michaela and Kate were similarly confused and terrified as to what was happening. A few moments later, Caesar came down to the basement, his face as pale as a ghost. "What happened?" I asked. The gunfire had ceased temporarily.
The woman..."
Caesar stuttered, clearly freaked out by what he had witnessed. "What about her?" I inquired further.
"She's in the fucking wall,"
he replied. "She's in the what now?"
"Like, I think she flew through the kitchen window, and now she's embedded in the fucking wall."
As I tried to process those words, a final round of gunfire ripped through the night. All 7 of us hunkered down in the basement, listening to the frantic attempts of the last remaining dude to call for help over the radio. Then, there was the sound of bones cracking and flesh tearing, followed by the man's petrifying screams, before everything went silent. The only sounds we could hear after that was the frantic barking of dogs, coming from the neighboring home. That was just over an hour ago, and now it's almost completely silent. We're still hunkered down in the basement. All of us are terrified as hell, especially Monica and Isabel. Those two haven't stopped crying for the past hour. Not that I blame them. I'm nearly on the verge of tears myself. I've tried checking for updates on the current situation online, but strangely, nothing has come up, not even from the local news sources. Mind you, the town that I live in isn't a small one. It has a population of maybe 30,000, and yet nothing has come up. I wanted to call 911, but then I remembered that emergency services wouldn't be available until 8 in the morning. So, for now, here we stay. I might provide some updates if I can, but my phone's battery is almost at 20%, and I don't have a charger, so I might not be able to for long. Until then, wish us luck. Update 1. I just woke up, and there's a helicopter flying over the house. I managed to get a glimpse of it through the basement window, and it seems like it dropped something nearby. I'm not sure if it's like a care package or something. The update 2. It's getting really hard to breathe right now. My throat is burning. I think there's a fire outside, because there's a whole lot of smoke.